The newest Elestrals set, Moonrise, is shaping up to be the most impactful set yet. Considering it's only the 4th set, that's not exactly a hard bar to clear, but Moonrise does have the potential to shift the very way that Elestrals is played from normal cast-centric decks to decks that feature a lot more special casting. With 127 cards in the set and 76 of those being new cards, there's a lot to consider going into this new format. To help you figure out what to play, I'm going to explain every new card in the set and what you can do with them. Let's start moon-gazing. The first thing to cover when talking about the impact of Moonrise is of course going to be the new Lunar cards. They are the focus of Moonrise after all. While Lunars first debuted in Daybreak, we only got 3 of them. 2 of which were part of the same Ascension line. A few more have trickled out through the Shattered Stars subscription, but the bulk of the Lunars are here in their theme set of Moonrise. That means this set has a lot of work to do to build Lunar as a deck of its own like all the other typings. And it does seem to be doing that work. There's so much to talk about here that I almost don't know where to start, so I've decided to go with our featured starter deck lines, which will be the easiest to get our hands on. The Posthumous line is going to be the easiest to start with, since we already had Fawnlet and Posthumous legal for months now, meaning the only new addition is the 2-drop that bridges the gap, Theraheart. We've even known about Theraheart's existence this whole time because of the effect on Fawnlet. For those who aren't aware, Fawnlet on summon searches either the Divine Rune Artemis, which is going to be a central part of any Lunar Nexus strategy, or Theraheart. Since Fawnlet is a Lunar Elestral that searches Artemis, it's likely to be an important part of the Lunar Nexus deck as well, especially since it gains defense for every spirit on Artemis. That makes Fawnlet a 6 defense wall just by summoning it and then activating Artemis, which is already a pretty good Divine Rune for its ability to suppress an Elestral on field until the end of the opponent's turn. Using that once still leaves you with a 5 defense Elestral, which is a good enough stat for Astrabbit, so it's good enough for me. Theraheart, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. Theraheart is a 2 Lunar drop that has no way to get itself out onto the field, so you're going to need to hard summon this guy on top of another Elestral, which seems like a big ask to me. It would need to have a pretty powerful effect to make up for that, so let's see what it's got. It's a bit like Pheramel, but for counter runes, negating a counter rune activation by disenchanting 2 Lunar spirits from an Artemis, which means you have to have an Artemis on field with at least 2 spirits. Then you can special ascend into Posthumous from hand or deck. It seems like it would be flavorful to include the Underworld too, but maybe that's just too much. You don't have to have the Posthumous to use the negate though, so this could be just used as a bad counter rune negate, and it doesn't have to negate your opponent's counter rune, so you can just proc the Ascension yourself if your opponent refuses to commit to a counter rune to avoid the moose. This makes it a bit more flexible than Pheramel for actually getting to the 3rd stage, but it requires a lot more setup and is much more costly to activate. While counter runes have seen a major resurgence this past format, I think Theraheart requires too much setup and is too costly to use, especially with its relatively small stats for a 2-drop. This guy crashes with crabs, like, come on. But there's still the possibility of using it to turbo out Posthumous, so just to be fully sure, we should look at that as well. Posthumous is a triple Lunar drop with 13 attack and 11 defense, generally decent stats, but it's no pen terror, meaning it's not likely to show up in any misenchant big guy decks. Posthumous turns your Artemis suppressions into a pop as well, and is also immune to counter runes while Artemis is enchanted on the field. This is not awful, but also not great. Posthumous is a really good card specifically for the length of time that Artemis remains on the field, but it also encourages you to use the Artemis effect, thus reducing the time that Artemis is on the field, and Posthumous is thus good. As soon as Artemis is gone, Posthumous might as well be suppressed. It no longer has any relevant effects until you get another Artemis on field. It also doesn't protect Artemis, so any back row removal can make your Posthumous basically useless as anything other than a large beat stick. Posthumous hasn't seen any play since it's been legal, and I don't think the new set is going to change that much. Even if it does see play though, it probably won't be played with Theraheart. Moonrise has a lot of other ways to get a 3-drop Lunar on field that are a lot easier to accomplish. Before we get to those though, let's finish out our starter deck Elestrals and focus on the Fulgorix line. This line starts with another creature from the Lunar Shattered Stars, Nabi. Nabi is a difficult card to gauge the power of. When it receives Lunar Spirits, it reduces the attack of Elestrals that aren't Lunar, or Solar for some reason, by 2. When it destroys an Elestral by battle, which it can do pretty easily with its 4 attack and the attack reduction effect, it can special ascend into Doppelgator, the 2-drop of the Ascension line. This card is crazy, on a power level approaching Eddie, unless you end up playing against a Lunar or Solar deck, in which case it's a dogshit card that does nothing. Even in other matchups, just a little misenchantment turns this fuck into a vanilla. I gotta be honest, I really don't like these kind of effects. It really feels shitty to lose because your cards literally don't do anything to 2 entire deck types. This is why I don't play Pokemon TCG on the regular. I just hate this stuff. And Lunar I at least get to an extent, but why Solar? Nabi is a Lunar Wind line, why not make it that? But no, Solar randomly gets the immunity here for some reason. It's very annoying because otherwise this card would be quite strong. I can still see this getting play, especially in the sideboard where it could be pulled out after you know what your opponent's playing, but it's not for me, I think. The same holds true for his Ascension Doppelgator. While you can very easily get Doppelganger out with Navi, it doesn't do much in a clash with a lunar or solar deck. Unlike Navi, Doppelganger's attack lowering effect is a continuous effect that lowers the attack of non-lunar and solar enchanted Elestrals by 1 for every lunar spirit attached to it, which should be at least 2. It does still have a receive effect, allowing it to special ascend into Fulgorix from hand or deck if it receives a lunar or wind spirit, specifically through a Nexus. This again makes it fairly easy to ascend into Fulgorix, although since the Navi Ascension line happens during battle, it's impossible to end on Fulgorix turn 1 through these effects. You can get it done during your opponent's turn with Ultra the Stars, but you'll need to have a Nexus bank on field for that. That means that Doppelganger stats will be relevant, and they're pretty bad. A 5/4 is awful for a 2-drop Elestral. It's obviously balanced around the attack reduction effect, but again, that only works if your opponent isn't on lunar or solar. So in some matchups, this is just an expensive Lumaru. Otherwise, it's not bad, but not great either. Fulgorix fares a bit better, which means Doppelganger getting it out makes Doppelganger much better than it has any right being. Fulgorix has another version of the attack decrease effect that just blanket decreases the attack of all non-lunar solar enchanted Elestrals by 5. This is significantly better than Doppelganger's version, since to reach that number there, you'd have to significantly overinvest in a card with absolutely no protection, especially since you need to get a wind on board for Fulgorix's 2 lunar 1 wind cost. Again though, this effect does not matter in a significant number of matchups. The worst part about this is that the more powerful these types of cards are, the less useful they end up being. If Fulgorix were to somehow become the top meta deck, you'd thus be more likely to run into mirror matches where their effects would be turned off. This is the same problem that Tsunami has with water decks, which could natively use the card. As far as Fulgorix goes though, the rest of the effects do make up for this a bit. Fulgorix is both a Nexuser and a Receiver, thus being able to proc its own effect. It can Nexus a lunar or a wind spirit, and then when it receives a lunar or wind spirit, it can target an opponent's card and put it on the bottom of the deck. This is a very powerful removal effect that dodges a lot of protections. Since that's a receive effect, it's also not once per turn, just the Nexus effect is. The stats on this guy being 10-6 makes it very vulnerable compared to other 3-drops, but the stats on 3-drops are so big compared to other Elestrals that's generally not going to matter much unless your opponent also gets a 3-drop on field. The main weakness would be the defense stat, but most of the cards that we played to get this guy into the defense position and then attack in will be playing in an element that would lose 5 attack, while most playable solar and lunar monsters can't get it in that position on their own and still struggle to get over a 6 defense monster. If Fulgorix hits the grave, it'll most likely be because of removal spells, which it has no protection from. I'd suggest not even attacking with this guy until you use his effect a few times to clear the back row, just to avoid a Shield of Achilles or what have you. Despite all my criticisms, this removal effect is strong enough, especially with a built-in way to proc it, that I could see this card finding a home in Lunar Nexus. The rest of the family might not make it, but Lunar has a lot of good ways to make a 3-drop on their own to make Fulgorix a surprisingly accessible but vulnerable powerhouse for the deck. Probably not as powerful as Pharaohgeist, but you could play one of each as alternate win cons. After all, you can only play one Pharaohgeist anyways now. That's really the only place I see this card having though, outside of starter deck tournaments where it's likely to be the strongest of the bunch. There's also one more lunar 3-part Ascension line, so let's cover what I think are the most interesting 3-part Ascension line in the set, the Volclipse line. Or should I say the Voldusk line, since this is the card that I actually think is interesting. Voldusk is a 1-drop with 5 defense, which makes it a pretty good defender for lunar typing, but you know that can't be all there is to it. Voldusk has one of the craziest effects ever printed in Elestrals. Every time you cast a lunar phase, you can either draw a card or return a lunar spirit from the underworld. Now, that's only twice per turn, but that's still a crazy powerful effect, assuming that lunar phase is anything worth playing at all. Well, it turns out there's 8 of them, and some of them are definitely worth playing. Others, not so much. Let's take a look at those right now to contextualize Voldusk's importance. Lunar Phase is a series of cards with the same name and different titles that covers the various phases of the moon, each with a different but vaguely synergistic effect. New Moon is a 1 lunar invoke rune that targets and suppresses an Elestral until the end phase with an additional effect that allows you to expend the cost of that Elestral and discard a lunar phase to destroy it. This card is pretty good as just a 1-cost suppression to deal with problematic effects during your turn, but the destruction makes it removal. Expensive removal, but in archetype removal, so we will absolutely take that. Remember, Elestrals is all about bad removal. Waxing Crescent is a 2 lunar counter rune that targets a lunar enchanted Elestral and gives them attack until the end phase equal to the number of lunar phases in both underworlds. This one is not so good. 2 cost is a lot to invest in a battle trait that relies on having other lunar phases in underworld to actually do anything. On the other hand, it is the only way Voldusk can get over anything with its 1 attack point. Luckily, I have some other suggestions for filling out the Voldusk deck that'll help you never even need to swap Voldusk to attack position, so hopefully you can get away with not playing this or only playing 1 copy at the very most. First Quarter is a 1 lunar counter rune that draws you a card. It's Upstart Goblin. Well, it's more like Jar of Greed since you have to set it. But that's not all. It also allows you to discard a Lunar Phase and recycle a Voldusk, Volumbra, or Volclipse from the grave to the hand. This not only cycles itself to make for kind of a 37 card deck, but also recycling Voldusk is incredibly important for retaining card and spirit advantage while using the Lunar Phases. This one seems almost essential to me for the Lunar Phase deck, but maybe not at 3 copies. Waxing Gibbous is a 1 lunar counter rune that can swap the position of lunar enchanted Elestrals. You can also expend an additional Lunar Spirit and discard a Lunar Phase to protect the targeted Elestral from destruction by card effect. This card is hard to evaluate. It would be a very important protection effect for Voldusk if it didn't switch its position. Voldusk is only good in one position, defense position. Now you can move Voldusk into attack, allowing you to get in for a little bit of damage on an open board state, which the Lunar Phases help you create, but it's incredibly telegraphed that if you leave a Voldusk in attack position with set back row, that you have either Waxing Gibbous or Waxing Crescent. Now, granted, what does the opponent actually do about this? Any attempt to clear the back row could just allow these runes to be chained in response and still get the desired effect. Since Waxing Gibbous does both effect protection and the position swap, it's particularly hard to play around outside of swapping the creature position yourself and following up with removal. And that also makes Waxing Crescent harder to play around too, since any set Waxing Crescent could theoretically be a Waxing Gibbous instead. But I'm not sure all that really overcomes the fundamental issue with both of these cards, that they only do something when you have a Lunar Elestral on field. If you're in a tight spot, neither of these cards will do anything for you when drawn off the top, other than be another Lunar Phase you can discard. Full Moon at first looks to have the same problem, but is actually a little bit different. It's a 1 lunar counter rune that enchants up to 2 Lunar Spirits to an Elestral on field. Then it also has another effect when discarded by another Lunar Phase that you can foretell 3, and as you'll see later, we do have some Lunars that want us to foretell, and just having that advanced knowledge can be a game changer, especially in a deck with plenty of cards that shuffle the deck. The primary effect we want to talk to you about is that enchanting effect though. Being able to surprise your opponent with an extra 2 damage, turn a 1-drop into a 3-drop in 1 turn, and trigger receive effects makes this Lunar Phase not only playable in our Voldusk deck, but also more generally playable in basically any Lunar deck. You could even put it in a non-Lunar deck to enchant your non-Lunar Elestrals with a Lunar Spirit to counter cards like Nabi and Dense Fog, or make Lunar 3-drops out of nowhere, or even misenchant non-Lunar 3-drops. This is the kind of power level and versatility a card is going to need to have if it's going to rely on a card already being on the field. Waning Gibbous is a 1 lunar invoke rune that shuffles a Lunar Phase, Volumbra, or Volclipse from hand or underworld into the deck to search a Voldusk. As you might imagine, this is an incredibly important piece of the Voldusk deck, giving it a lot more consistency. With a critical mass of Lunar Phases, this card could essentially be always online to make this one of the most consistent decks in the game. A very good card for that deck specifically, but less generally applicable. Final Quarter is a 1 lunar invoke rune that sends up to 2 Lunar Phases from the deck to the underworld. When it's discarded by another Lunar Phase, you can return a Lunar Spirit from the underworld to the spirit deck. This card is designed to synergize with the final stage of Voldusk, Volclipse, which needs all 8 Lunar Phases in grave for a board wipe. I don't think that actually sounds very good, but if it turns out to be worth it, this card is great for enabling that. For our Voldusk control deck though, this card is fine. It's an easy Lunar Phase to activate and trigger Voldusk, it can thin the deck out a bit, and most importantly it's good fuel for your other Lunar Phase effects that actually has a decent discard effect. I think this is a decent one to play and helps you reach a critical mass of Lunar Phases, but it's not a high priority include either. If you're looking to play Volclipse, you'll want this for sure, otherwise you can skip it for more generics. Waning Crescent is a 1 lunar invoke rune that allows you to return up to 2 Lunar Spirits from the underworld to the spirit deck. It also has an effect when discarded that allows you to draw a card and then discard a card. This would be discarding by effect of a Lunar Phase, by the way, meaning you can chain triggers of Lunar Phase discard effects with this effect. This card being a heal one probably makes this playable in basically every Lunar deck, just like Full Moon. Add one of the Lunar Phases that discards other Lunar Phases and you have a powerful engine that can be used in just about any Lunar deck. For the Voldusk deck, this is an absolute include. Combined with Voldusk, this card is just ambrosia. Altogether, that's 7 of the 8 Lunar Phase cards that are playable to at least some degree in the Volclipse deck. If you played 3 copies of all of them, that'd be 21 cards, a little over half the deck. You would want to play 1 copy of the bad one as well, bringing you to 22, but you probably also want to go down to 2 on some of the other Lunar Phases as well, like Waxing Gibbous and First Quarter. For the Voldusk control build, you probably want to cut down even more, fully removing cards like Waxing Gibbous, Waxing Crescent, and Final Quarter. You'll end up with around 10 to 15 Lunar Phases in the deck, depending on where you decide to cut the cards. This will provide a solid core of Lunar Phases that will be enhanced by your very accessible Voldusk. This is what makes Voldusk such a powerful Elestral in my eyes. My concern though is that this control strategy might be a little bit too slow to keep up with the Moonrise meta. At the very least though, Voldusk does a lot against 5 since it has 5 defense and pluses you on every Lunar Phase, allowing you to keep more even on spirits and card advantage. In my testing, I've had 4 set cards basically every turn, and that feels pretty nice. But what about its kin? Can they stand up to the test? Volumbra is theoretically what you're supposed to ascend Voldusk into and continues the trend of being defense-oriented with a 5/7 stat line. When you discard a lunar phase during your main phase, you can special ascend a Voldusk into Volumbra from your hand. That means you not only have to have Voldusk on field, which admittedly is pretty easy, but you also have to have this guy in hand, a bit more difficult, and also have 2 lunar phases, one of which has a discard effect, and it has to be one that you would want to activate during your main phase, which makes the prospect of actually getting this ascend combo to work pretty dismal. In several cases, you have to actively make worse plays in order to proc the effect, if the card isn't just dead in hand. And what does it do when you get it on the field? Well, when you cast Full Moon specifically, you can special ascend to Volclips. That means for the full combo, we have to have in hand a Voldusk, a Volumbra, a lunar phase with a discard effect, a lunar phase to discard, and a full moon. That's a 5-card combo, dog. Even the draws off of Voldusk make that unlikely. And you lose the Voldusk in this combo because of the Ascension, meaning you lose the strongest card in the deck to get to a vanilla that becomes a bigger guy. So the bigger guy is going to have to be pretty crazy to make this playable at all, and even then, you probably just want to skip this step. Volclips is our bigger guy, and wait, this guy only has 6 attack? Is it a super heavy samurai? Am I supposed to be attacking in defense position? Well, the answer is no. Volclips actually gains attack equal to the number of separate titles of lunar phases in the underworld. That means the attack stat could be anywhere from 6 to 14. Considering how much setup it requires to get into the double digits though, I'm still going to put this under the bad category, especially with how much suppression there is in Moonrise format. It's the other effect that makes it a little bit more difficult to just say no to. You can shuffle 8 lunar phases with different titles to the deck to return the opponent's entire field to the hand. They don't get any of the spirits back, by the way, that all goes to the grave. This is a very powerful effect with a very complicated setup. This is why First Quarter sends 2 to the grave to power this effect, but even that isn't really enough to fully set this up. It is returning everything to the hand really worth all that setup? The opponent just gets to set and cast everything again. You've given yourself 1 turn to win the game, so it's gotta be your finishing move. It reminds me a lot of Cryo Scorch, but with a generally better deck to build around. But that might be the difference maker. The Lunar Phase deck seems very powerful, so maybe you can squeeze in a Volclips to drop on the field to close out the game. Or maybe you could just run Pharaohgeist instead. Who's to say? But if you do run Volclips, you can just run one and try an Exaltus package from Daybreak, which can search both Voldusk and Volclips to make the deck even more consistent, perhaps one of the most consistent of all time. All you need is another card to Nexus the Solar Spirit to. Speaking of searching, there's a few more cards that synergize with the lunar phases. Werepup is a 1 lunar with mediocre stats of 3/2, but when it's normal cast, it searches a lunar phase from deck. This allows you access to the fuel of your deck, including the lunar phase that searches Voldusk, making it much more consistent yet again. It can also search Full Moon, which not only makes Volumbra special ascend into Volclips, it also makes Werepup special ascend into Lycavoid. Lycavoid is a 2 lunar Elestral with 6 attack and 2 defense. Not very impressive, it loses the Cryoblast after all, but it's pretty easy to get out, so let's see what the effect does. Well, it does piercing damage, and is unaffected by counter runes if you activated Full Moon this turn. So, not particularly good. Piercing is interesting, especially in a creature that can attack over Astrabbit, and blanking counter runes is nice, but the limitation to turns where Full Moon has been activated and the relatively puny stats for a 2-drop make this a questionable include. The only argument I see for its inclusion is the ease of access. Werepup searching a Full Moon not only allows you to get access to Full Moon and the 2-spirit enchantment it provides, but also a 6-attack beater with bonuses if Full Moon was activated this turn. Granted, you won't want to search Full Moon every time, but Werepup and Full Moon are cards you will want to play anyways, so what harm does one Lycavoid do? Well, for one, Full Moon is a counter rune, meaning Werepup will have to survive a turn. You can't even protect it very well because you need to save your protection for Voldusk. Now there is a way to make this work in your favor by using the threat of Lycavoid to protect your Voldusk, but this still risks a dead draw of Lycavoid, and the out is very simply just any back row removal for the Full Moon. Like yeah, you can chain the Full Moon and get the spirits and the Lycavoid out, but then it's just a 6 attack stat when it comes back around to your turn, and it's vulnerable to removal during the opponent's turn. I don't know, I'm probably going to experiment with this guy in builds at first, and then cut him if I don't find him impactful enough. Now that we talked about our 3-drop lunar guys, let's talk about the guys that make them more accessible to us. First up, Gloombat, which was first released as part of Shatterstars, has an ascension now in Phasmacore. Gloombat itself has very tiny stats of 2/1, but can be special cast from the hand if the opponent controls 2 or more face-down runes. The likelihood of that is becoming debatable because of another Moonrise inclusion of Hurricane, but there's a likelihood of people still setting 2 to play around Thunderbolt. You can also disenchant a lunar to pop a rune, which is also pretty strong. There's no gameplay connection between Gloombat and Phasmacore, so you don't really have to concern yourself with that to understand why Phasmacore might have a place in lunar decks. Phasmacore is an 8/1 2-drop, which is a pretty crazy attack stat that does lose the Cryoblast, but that doesn't hurt too much because of the effect. If Phasmacore is destroyed by anything, you can expend a lunar spirit to special cast it from the underworld in the end phase. This means that Phasmacore is a very sticky 2-drop with a decent attack stat, making it easier to get into your 3-drops. It does require getting this guy out on the field in the first place, a big ask for basically any 2-drop. It also is pretty costly from a spirit perspective, costing 3 lunar spirits every time. Then of course is the fact that you can out it in any way other than destruction to break the cycle and waste a lot of invested resources. The other pair of monsters that can help us achieve our 3-drops are a bit more successful at it, provided you build your deck to accommodate. Hypnosum is a puny little 1/1 guy that when destroyed can special cast itself in attack, but only misenchanted. It's not good. It's a worse version of the Phasmacore effect, albeit on an easier monster to get out. It's a bit too defensive for my taste. Its Ascension Ectoplasm is where the power lies. This 2-drop also has abysmal stats as a 3/3 2-drop, but the effect is crazy. If it's sent from hand or deck to grave, you can expend 1 lunar spirit to special cast it, but you have to use lunar spirits. You'll note that it doesn't say from the field, meaning that once it's cast, it becomes vulnerable. But if you are set up to do something with it immediately, that won't matter too much. This card could be very strong in the mill deck that is really shaping up this set, either giving you a 2-drop body to misenchant into Pen Terror, or properly enchanting a Pharaohgeist, or dropping a Blizztrix on top. We'll get to Blizztrix, don't you worry. It could also potentially see some more play if we get more discard cards, but that seems even more unreliable than a mill deck currently. Next up, we have the Havacub line, starting with Havacub itself, who is just dog shit, is bad, is really bad, is no good, awful, terrible card. It's a 1 lunar 4/3 that the opponent can't change the position of. Who cares? If the opponent is using a position-changing effect on Havacub, I'm already happy to take that trade. Get out of here. Its Ascension, Pulveror, is the one I really want to talk about here. Pulveror in hand can special ascend onto a 1 lunar Elestral by disenchanting a lunar on field. This means you can take a lunar off of an Artemis or a Temple of the Moon to get a 2-drop on the field without using your normal cast, and all it takes is keeping a lunar Elestral on the field for a turn. Alternatively, you can do this proactively to turn a 1-drop into a 2-drop with 7 attack and 4 defense immediately. I really like this one. It seems quite strong, very useful for making a 3-drop. These cards make lunar the best typing for making 3-drops, for now, and yet they're still not as good as just using Full Moon. The best of these is probably Pulveror, provided you could draw into it and the 3-drop, or perhaps search one of them. That seems pretty easily doable as we get more searchers. The second would probably be Ectoplasm because of its ease of summoning, but a mill deck is extremely dependent on what you mill and how much you can mill, and even with the new cards in Moonrise, I'm not sure if we've quite reached the tier limit event horizon, especially not for a lunar themed deck. But we'll cover that more when we get to the new mill cards. Continuing our overview of what's new in lunar, let's look at some more cards you're actually likely to play. Toxiri is a 1 lunar 2/4 that searches Dense Fog on summon. Dense Fog, for those who aren't familiar, is a 1 lunar counter rune that suppresses every Elestral on field that isn't lunar enchanted. Dense Fog is more along the lines of Tsunami than Nabi, where its power level and ease of sighting out does make for a quite strong card. But what if it did a little bit more? Toxiri also reduces the attack and defense of suppressed Elestrals by 2. This makes that small attack and decent defense even better, since Toxiri searches you a way to suppress Elestrals. What I'm saying is, this guy is pretty good and could see a lot of play even outside of lunar decks. Its Ascension probably will not have that, but still seems fine. Night Venom is a 2 lunar with 6/6 stats, which is kinda crazy good. Like sure, 6 isn't a huge number, but 6 on both stats makes it not care about a lot of possession change cards that are so popular now. It allows you to discard a Dense Fog to pop 2 cards on field. This means that if you do end up in a lunar mirror match, Dense Fog is not a dead card with Night Venom on field. Additionally, if you have 2 or more Dense Fog in the underworld, Night Venom cannot be targeted by Invoke runes. This effect seems bad to me though. You have to establish a Night Venom firstly, which I'm going to come back to, then you have to draw and either activate Dense Fog or discard it for Night Venom's effect twice. It just seems a little unlikely to happen, and then for all that, you're protected from the specific Invoke runes that target? Great. Awesome. Thanks. It's absolutely a good removal tool, but I don't think the protection effect is really something you should be considering when evaluating this card. Instead, you should be considering the cost of getting this guy onto the field. I cannot believe they still expect us to hard ascend a 2-drop Elestral. I think there's going to be a lot of times where this will be a very big tempo swing, and a lot of times where this will be rotting in your hand or underworld and completely unable to stick. If you're okay with that, I would consider playing this in a deck heavy with Artemis and Dense Fog. Drakid and Drakking we've had around for a bit, and we basically know what's going on with them. I mainly want to mention that with the new tools available to do lunar strategy, that would not be impossible to see a lunar-focused Drakking deck in addition to the water one we know today. We also might see a deck focused on lunar and water together, which we can get to more when we talk about the new water Elestrals. But also I feel like Drakking might be just a little bit too slow for the new format. We'll have to see. Now for the one-off lunars, we have Corvuscull, a 1-drop lunar Elestral with 2/4 stats. When it receives 1 or more Lunar Spirit, you can foretell 3 and exchange one of the foretold cards with a card in the underworld, which then becomes foretold. This is the beginning of Lunar's foray into the foretell keyword, and it seems fine. Not great, not awful, just fine. It can move cards that want to be foretold from the underworld directly into being foretold, but so far there isn't any Lunar who cares about that. Since Corvuscull is a receiver and can't just activate that effect on its own, you need an extensive Lunar package to activate that effect more than just on cast. We've got 1 more Lunar that foretells in this set, but it doesn't really help our situation. Cryptaris is a a 1-drop Lunar with 2/4 stats that deals with foretelling. Hey, didn't I already read this just now? Okay, no, the effect is different here, as Cryptaris gains 2 attack for each time you foretold this turn, and then can expend 1 Lunar to foretell 3 and add any Lunar Elestrals that cost 2 or more spirits to your hand. This means this guy can quite easily become a 4 attacker or even a 6, and you can use it to speed up the acquisition of 2 and 3 drops for the Lunar deck. But is it good? It's interesting for sure, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing with this guy yet. Maybe once we get more Lunar Foretell cards, this will start to make a bit more sense. And speaking of 2-drop Elestrals, we have a Lunar Lith now. Necrolith is a 2 Lunar Elestral with 7/3, making it the best attacker in the Lith typing, but it also loses to Eddy. It can be normal cast if the opponent has at least 2 suppressed cards, then it can pop a suppressed Elestral on summon, which will likely be there if you cast it by its effect. This is an interesting Lith, not as universally applicable as Lavalith or as individually powerful as Moralith, but more powerful within its own deck like Kosalith, but more powerful than Kosalith. A very powerful beater that can also pop, and all you need is Dense Fog, which is now searchable, or 2 other ways of suppressing cards like Artemis or Gorgon's Gaze. Definitely interesting. It may have a place in the Dense Fog control deck with Night Venom and company. Hard to say on that though. What I do feel very definite about is the power of Comalis. Comalis is a 1-drop Lunar with 4/2 stats and a Nexus ability that nexus up to 2 Lunar to search a Spectral Elestral from the deck. This gives you easy access to Posthumous, the Possum line, another Comalis, and of course, Pharaohgeist. This card, much like Exaltus, is strong but lacks a great search target other than Pharaohgeist. Pharaohgeist is good, of course, limit-worthy you might say, but requires some setup to get to the field. A nice 1-drop to search I think would really break this card, especially since this is one of the few Lunar Nexusers. Bandaloon I'm also pretty certain about, but it goes the other way. This 3/1/1 drop can expend 2 Lunars in order to take control of an opponent's face-down rune. Now that reads crazy until you think about it for 5 seconds. You're expending 2 spirits to take a mystery rune that you would then have to pay to activate, and to do so you summon an Elestral with terrible stats. To top it all off, it's almost certainly a counter rune set, which can almost certainly be chained to the activation of Bandaloon. So in reality, you're not paying 2 spirits to steal an interruption, you're paying 2 spirits to force out an interruption. It doesn't seem worth it to me. I'd rather just play a card that actually does something. That'll force out an interruption without spending 2 additional spirits. Finally, for the Lunar Elestrals, we have Porky Wraith. It's a 1-drop 2/2, terrible stats, so you can better believe it's got a battle trick. When Porky Wraith enters battle with an Elestral, you can lower their attack by 2 for each Lunar enchanting Porky Wraith. It's fine. It's just fine. It can be pretty funny when over-enchanted, but probably not funny enough to be worth doing it. Moving on to the runes that aren't lunar phases, let's check out our signature divine rune, Artemis. Artemis does what every divine rune but Aeolus does, it adds 3 additional spirits onto itself. Its disenchant effect allows it to suppress an Elestral until the end of the opponent's turn. It's quite possibly one of the strongest divine runes ever printed. I really like the look of it. In a world where Lunar has good Nexusers and good receivers, this card will really elevate the power of Lunar Nexus. I think at this point Lunar Nexus really only has 1 good Nexuser in Comalis and no good receivers. Fulgorix requires a lot of setup, Nabi is match dependent, and Corvuscle's receiver effect doesn't do anything in Lunar Nexus yet. None of that diminishes Artemis' strength, as you can even run a 1 of Artemis in decks that play Divine Rune searches just to get some suppression on field. A lot of potential in this one card. Artemis' signature artifact is the 1-drop Bow of Artemis, which gives the equipped Elestral piercing, which is at least interesting, but maybe not enough. That's why it also allows you to Nexus from Artemis to the equipped Elestral on attack declaration. This might be a strong potential card in Lunar Nexus decks, if they ever print a good Lunar receiver. Until then, it's just extra damage and piercing, which doesn't seem good enough to me. Artemis' signature stadium is Temple of the Moon, and it does the same thing every other stadium except for Ursa Den does. Now that we're done with these, maybe we can start to get some more interesting stadiums in the future. Considering how much ability Lunar has to stack a lot of Lunar Spirits on a single guy though, this stadium is likely to see some amount of play, especially if Lunar Nexus ever comes together as a deck. And that's all the other Lunar runes, basically just the obligatory ones required to match the other typings. They even basically have the same names as the solar ones. None of these are particularly inspiring, and they're not supposed to be. Luckily, we're done with all this stuff now, and future sets can focus on cards with cool new interactions and mechanics instead of rounding out one of the core typings. Okay, so that's all the Lunars. As you might expect for a set themed around introducing the Lunars, there's a lot of them, and a lot of power behind them. Is it enough to make Lunar meta relevant? But who knows? I have a hard time having solid opinions about what is and isn't relevant in this game as is. The sample sizing isn't large enough to get a good idea besides like the general concept that Earth is very strong and there's an extremely powerful core of lightning cards that can be used in a variety of ways to great effect, and that 5s are pretty decent. Water seems nice as well, but it never converts. So how do you explain that? So when I say here that Lunar looks like it's set to be quite strong as a variety of decks, I want you, the viewer at home, to take that with a grain of salt large enough for Sisyphus to push up a hill for all eternity. I like the looks of the Voldust deck, Lunar Nexus has a lot of potential, Dense Fog control could be quite strong, or it could all lose in top 8 to Barabog Turbo, because this game is so hard to predict that it's crazy. To try and help solve that and get a better look at what other decks are bringing to the table, let's take a look at the other typings. Earth. Earth is currently the best typing in the room, even after the ban list, so they're not really looking for much from this set, but they do need a little something to recuperate their losses and put them back on top instead of 5s. With that in mind, let's take a look at what they're getting. Ardbud, a 1 Earth drop 2/1, represents a new 3 Ascension line that has a lot of potential to become a powerful Earth lunar deck of its own, focusing on A-Drive's favorite subclass, Insectoids. When Ardbud receives an Earth Spirit, you can search your deck for an Insectoid Elestral, which there happens to be quite a few strong examples of, particularly the now semi-limited Viscerus and its underwhelming pal, Spectrus. Even outside of its own deck, this effect might make it a decent backup receiver for Earth decks to shore up the mudlets. But it also has another effect that allows it to disenchant a spirit from the Insectoid Elestral to special ascend to Ardverum from the deck. Note that if you draw your Ardverum, you're going to have to normal cast it instead. It's a little slow, especially for an Elestral with such wimpy stats, but if Ardverum is good enough, then it might be worth it, so let's check that out. Ardverum is an Earth Lunar 2-drop 6/3 that on cast searches an Insectoid Elestral to hand, which again, pretty nice. Especially since you probably just disenchanted one to get it on the field in the first place. It can also target and destroy an Insectoid on field. This can be good for countering Earth decks running Viscerus, but also good for countering the mirror. You can also pop your own Insectoid if you just want this effect to go off, and you might just want to, since if it successfully pops, you get the special ascend into Ant-Titan from hand or deck, and Ant-Titan is a bit of a beast. Ant-Titan is a 2 Earth 1 Lunar 3-drop with 11/8 stats, which are pretty fine stats, although certainly lower than some 3-drops. Ant-Titan's effects really do make up for it though. You could discard an Insectoid to pop a card, which is just crazy. Even crazier, you could do that twice per turn. Additionally, while there's an Insectoid Elestral on field, Ant-Titan is unaffected by the effects of the opponent's Elestrals. This card really is a test of how much power you have to put behind a 3-drop to actually get anyone to play it. The card is crazy and relatively easy to get out. Not only that, it has a good matchup against one of the best decks in the room, Earth, since it invalidates Mudlet, can turn their Viscerus into fuel for your combo, and basically only has issues against the limited Earthquake. It also completely hoses the Fulgorix deck, making that strategy even more cheeks, which is pretty funny to me. The mirror matches will be absolutely brutal though. I'm not sure how consistent this strategy will be, and I really think that'll be the determining factor for how playable it'll be. But I know for a fact people will be tinkering with this, so be on the lookout. Cactubril is part of the underwhelming Sandstorm strategy and continues the trend of being underwhelming. It's a 1/2/1 drop that can disenchant an Earth Spirit from itself to negate a counter rune. I feel like most of these guys that require you to disenchant from them to do an effect are pretty bad, and this is one of them. It can also special ascend into Cactubrum when Sandstorm is cast, which is like a worse tsunami for Earths that also makes defense position Elestrals return to hand, and also requires a Wind Spirit in addition to the Earth Spirit. Cactubrum is going to have to be pretty dang strong to be worth all this. And it's not! Cactubrum is a 2-drop 4/6 that can't be targeted by Invoke runes. When it receives an Earth Spirit, you can special cast a Cactubril from the Underworld, which means that if you summon it by the effect of Cactubril, you get to have that Cactubril back. That's neat and all, but I don't think it really makes up for the necessary setup. The thing that makes Rock in a Hard Place work as a deck is that Eddy and Rock in a Hard Place are both decent cards, Eddy being in fact very strong. Cactubril is fine, and Sandstorm is pretty bad, so you can't convince me to play both of them to get a defense guy that just summons an okay guy from the Underworld and can't be targeted by Invoke runes. That's just not enough for me. I don't see these guys getting much play. Then we have 1 rune, No Stone Unturned. This 2 Earth Invoke rune simply searches a Golem Elestral, a subclass which includes all of the liths. This card doesn't so much have implications for Earth outside of having that typing and searching Rummagem, but instead has implications for the game as a whole by making every single lith searchable, and any other golems as well. This card design also opens up a lot of space for more search tools, which I'm super excited about. Very interesting indeed. We're just gonna have to limit every lith eventually, apparently. There's technically one more card and a reprint that are Earth as their primary spirit, but they make much more sense to talk about with the Frost Elestrals, so I'll save them for that section. That means we're done for Earth for now. Earth did need something, and the Ant-Titan line, particularly Ardbud, provided them with some interesting new tools, and potentially a new focus point as well. I think they come out of this set looking quite nice. Fire. Fire is not in nearly as good a shape. Fire is pretty cheeks right now despite having some strong cards in its roster and can really use a few more tools to bring it up to par with the rest of the crowd. Let's see if they got any. Cinder has been reprinted in the set in order to give it a new Ascension line, Salashade. Cinder is a 1-drop 3/2 that mills your opponent for 3 when it receives fire. The new Salashade attempts to make that mill win con a bit better. It's a Fire Lunar 2-drop with a 3/3 stat line that gets an additional attack for every Elestral in the opponent's Underworld, which can add up fast. When either player casts an Elestral, you can mill the opponent for 3 yet again, which if you can get some amount of special casting done means you could mill the opponent for quite a lot. Now the issue here is that milling could also set the opponent up for their combo, depending on the strategy at play. It's a dangerous thing to go all in on, but if you get enough of a combo going, this could become a quite funny FTK. It's probably nothing for now, but keep an eye on this. Bellowbee is a 1-drop 2/2 that gives Fire and Wind enchanted Elestrals +1 attack, which means it's technically a 3/2. This effect sucks, so let's skip ahead to the next one where you can target Fire and Wind enchanted Elestrals and make them immune to counter runes until the next turn. It's a terrible card, but I guess it makes Flammoth a little bit better. Its Ascension, Ephornax, is a Fire Wind 2-drop with 4/7 stats. It allows you to expend a Wind Spirit to bounce an opponent's card back to hand. This is not bad, honestly. If it wasn't on a 2-drop, I'd be really into it. Additionally, when you cast an Elestral or a rune with Fire or Wind Spirits, Ephornax gains 2 attack until the end phase, which can let it get out of defense position and do some damage. Then if you have Tsunami set, you can swap it back to defense if the opponent tries to challenge it. Really, any counter rune will work well enough though, since they all give it that +2 attack. Honestly, this one to me seems quite a bit better than Bellowbee. I'm just not sure if the 2-drop is worth it for what you get. It is certainly getting close to what it would take for me to play a 2-drop though, so that's a good sign. I do want to mention though, we maybe talk about this in the context of fires, but it is probably better in a wind deck despite the red frame. I only kept it in this category because there's barely any fire guys otherwise. Speaking of, lastly we have Torchin, which is a heal card for the fire deck. This 1-drop 1/1 creature can on attack declaration return fire spirits from the underworld to the spirit deck equal to the number of enchanted fire spirits on your field. This is really bad. Obviously the idea is that you attack into a defense position guy, and in some rare positions you could heal a lot of spirits in one effect, but wow, I do not think this is worth it at all. This guy stinks on ice. So did Fire get what they were looking for? No, not really. They got more support for a gimmicky alt-win con, more Flammoth support, and a bad heal card, none of which was anything they were looking for at all. I guess you'll have to wait till next set, Fire fans. Again. Water. As I mentioned before, water looks very well placed, but generally fails to convert outside of exactly wet 5s. That means Moonrise is in a position to really bring it over the edge here and let it become a game plan deck, especially since water already has a healthy amount of lunar in it currently thanks to Drakking and company. Let's see if Moonrise delivers on the new tools that water needs. First up, we have the adorable Schnark, which is a 1-drop 3/3. On cast, it searches a card with an enchantment cost of water lunar. This gets you anything from Rockin' a Hard Place to Drakking to Schnark's Ascension to the new Tsunami, which we'll get to shortly. This is a really strong piece of the Water Lunar puzzle and goes very well with his Ascension, Joblin. Joblin is a Water Lunar 2-drop with 8/4 stats. That's pretty good attack for a 2-drop, but it's not all. It also allows you to expend 1 Water Spirit to change the position of an Elestral on the field that isn't water enchanted, giving you a little mini Tsunami. Now that seems to fall into the problem I've had with other cards where it could just be stalled out by cards of that typing, and don't get me wrong, it is that. This card does in fact lose to Galaxy, but it also has another effect. When 1 or more Elestrals change their position, you can draw a card. This means you get to draw off Tsunami, you get to draw off of Joblin, you get to draw off of switching the positions of your Elestrals, meaning you can do some pseudo clown control shenanigans. There's also the new Tsunami, which again we'll get to soon. Joblin is a really good card, and that takes a lot for a 2-drop to achieve. I expect to see this guy getting play in water decks just for the pure advantage engine it represents in a deck with so much position swapping. You might perhaps even see the development of a deck focused around position swapping and getting this guy out to turn that into card advantage. Joblin, Eddy, Mudlet, Tsunami 1 and 2, some more cards we're going to get to later. There's a lot going for it, and swapping positions makes almost every card in the game vulnerable, especially if you have an 8 attack stat guy on the field. This is one I definitely have my eye on. Tsunami 2, High Tide, I think is also interesting, but not as promising. It's a Water Lunar Invoke rune that changes the position of up to 2 Elestrals and allows you to enchant a Water or Lunar Spirit from your underworld to the field. So this card is worse Tsunami in basically every conceivable way, except that it can affect Water Elestrals and enchants a spirit from the underworld. I guess you also get to use it right away instead of having to set it, but that means you also lose the quickness of Tsunami. High Tide costs more and does less, but considering the strength of Tsunami, that may just be enough to make this playable, especially since our friend Schnark can search it in addition to Joblin. I think it has a place in position control for sure, even if just as a one-of to search if you already have Joblin. Outside of that, I'm not too sure. I also just feel really bad at evaluating what removal options are going to be good after so terribly misevaluating Cryoblast. My instincts tell me it's got potential, but the cost is so high, I don't know. Moving on from Water Lunar to just plain water, we have a reprint of Oystress because we have the new Ascension Oystillery. Oystress, for those who don't remember, is a truly terrible card that gets 1 defense for each water spirit on the field. Then Oystillery can special ascend onto an Oystress if you disenchant 1 water from the field. You are never doing this because Oystress is awful. The important part of this 2-water 4/8 creature is that you can discard a water card to target and destroy a card. This is really nice removal, especially for a typing like water, which has a lot of cards you actually want to play. Does this mean you play it? It's got good defense, it converts water cards into removal, but I'm not sure that's worth the Ascension. Maybe if Oystress were something I actually wanted to play like Dratagwa or Eddy, but it's not. Lastly, for water, we have a bit of an interesting new archetype for the game, Starbit. Starbit is a 1-drop 1/1 that gets +2 attack for every water spirit enchanting it, meaning it actually starts as a 3/1 and gets bigger from there. To help it get bigger, it allows you to nexus up to 2 water spirits. You'll also recall that Poseidon himself also nexuses, meaning a Poseidon and a Starbit alone get you 4 water enchanting for 9 attack all in one turn. Funny thing though, when Starbit has 7 or more attack during the main phase, you have to either destroy it or special ascend to Starbit Supernova from hand or deck. That's right, much like Morfrost, Starbit has another form, and much like Crowling, it changes to that when it gains enough attack. Starbit Supernova is a 1-drop 7/2 but cannot be normal cast. No restriction on how you special cast it though, you can get it out by way of Foamy in addition to the Starbit effect. If you do summon it with Starbit though, it gets another effect. This effect allows you to nexus all the spirits from it, and then draw a card before it would be destroyed. Considering at this point it would likely have 4 or 5 spirits on it, this is a pretty good way to preserve some spirits on field, and the draw doesn't hurt. It's kind of just icing on the cake though, because what you really care about here is the 7 attack stat. That's why I don't hate the Foamy play, any more than I hate any Foamy play. I think the Starbit additional effect only really matters when you've summoned it from a Starbit and have invested so many spirits in the one creature. Really, the heavy investment is the issue here. I have trouble recommending this combo since it puts you 4 deep in on a 7 attack guy. The Foamy version, however, you go 2 deep, which feels a bit better. The only problem there is the inconsistency of Foamy, but if you want to free a 7 attack guy, you gotta take a little risk. So that's water. There's some promising pieces of support in here. Is it enough to pierce the meta? Perhaps. The weakened Earth and Thunder after last ban lift have left room for something to challenge them given the right pieces of support, and Water 5s has already been taking results as is. The game plan version of Water, or a more lunar-oriented high tide themed deck, certainly has a chance of being that challenger. If it does, the difference maker will likely be Schnark and Joblin, or more specifically, Joblin. The rest of these don't really seem to be on that same level of power. Thunder. Thunder, much like Earth, doesn't need a lot here. Despite being hit much harder than Earth in the last list, it's still plenty playable. So while they do need something to put them above 5s, it doesn't need too much. Which is good for them because they really aren't getting that much here, a grand total of 5 cards. We begin with Electrify and its Ascension Electronite. Electrify is a 1-drop 1/1 that can disenchant to search a 1-spirit Thunder Elestral. The stats on this guy make it very hard to set up in any meaningful way, but it is an interesting card that adds some Thunder consistency for the cost of your normal. Electronite makes it a bit more interesting though. This Thunder Lunar 2-drop with 4/6 stats can nexus Thunder or Lunar, which gives Thunder a decent nexus guy again, but is also a receiver itself. When it receives Thunder, and not Lunar, you can special cast an Electrify from hand or deck, which you can then use to get a search. When you do, Electronite lets you draw a card, doubling the card advantage. It's like Engage! These cards are really neat. I really like the design space of these cards, and I think they have a lot of potential to be quite strong. That's kinda it though, it's just pure card advantage on these here guys. Sometimes though, that's all you need. What you don't need, however, is Titano Strike. This 1-drop 2/4 reads good on paper, but in practice is just not worth it. This isn't even an assumption, since this card has been out and about for a time thanks to the Shattered Stars release. When a player casts Thunderstorm, you can expend a Thunder Spirit to target and destroy an Elestral. Seeing as Thunderstorm is a pretty decent rune removal spell, you would think this would be quite nice, but for one, this card does nothing without Thunderstorm. Even though Thunderstorm is looking to get a bit better this set, it's not good enough to make this 2-card combo not suck. And second, it's costly. Titano Strike is a 1-cost guy, but the Thunderstorm is a 2-cost removal, and then you have to expend an additional spirit. So it's like you have Thunderstorm and Earthquake in a way, except you can't use them separately, they have to go together. You also get a guy on field, I suppose, but it's just a 4 defense guy who sits there doing nothing until you get the Thunderstorm to hand. Not good. Magneros is another Nexus piece for the Thunder deck, and one that doesn't require an Ascension. It's a 1-drop 2/4 that can Nexus up to 2 to foretell cards up to the number of Thunder enchanted cards on the field, and add a Thunder Invoke rune foretold that way to your hand. We really are spreading out the foretell keyword, huh? It's a 1-drop Thunder that does a Nexus and then does something useful afterwards, which is exactly what Thunder Nexus wants. To be clear though, Thunder Nexus is slightly different from the Thunder deck that was previously dominating the meta. That deck wasn't Nexusing for quite some time, for lack of a decent Nexuser. Magneros might be able to be the fix to that, because this guy is quite good. Thunder has some great invoke runes like Thunderstorm, and some good enough ones like the now limited Race to the Top, and this card simultaneously can give you greater access to those, but also let you see the top of the deck. Not that it matters too much if you're Nexusing onto Astrabbit. Regardless, I think this card could bring the Nexus back into Thunder. Lastly, Thunder has a new counter rune that features Magneros Magneros on the card art, despite the fact that Magneros can't add a counter rune with its effect. Magnetic Force Field is a 1 cost that can only be cast when your opponent activates a non-counter rune effect that causes you to expend spirits. You negate the effect and then make them expend 2 spirits instead. This is a very funny card that does basically nothing for Thunder as a deck, but makes for a very good anti-burn card, turning around the burn effect without being able to be countered by another copy of itself. That's why it can't affect counter runes, by the way. It's so you can't just have a chain of these things negating each other. I'm expecting this card to see some play someday. I'm just not sure when that'll be now that Drataya is banned and in hell. Thunder is getting some nice tools to his arsenal, none of which feel particularly broken. Like, they're good, yeah, but nothing I'm super concerned about. The deck is already one of the most powerful in the room though, so really these are just filling in the spots from the last ban list and the first ban list. It does seem a lot more beatable than previous incarnations of the strategy, so hopefully the other decks will be able to compete with it post-release and Unlimit of Zeus. Wind. Wind is right alongside Fire as possibly one of the worst typings in the game right now. A lot of potential, but no follow-through as of yet. So much like Fire, Wind is looking for a lot of new tools. Will they also be disappointed? Yes. Now let's take a look at the new stinkers. Wind Djinn is a 1-drop 3/1 that brings Foretelling to Wind. When it receives Wind, you can name a card and then foretell 3. If the card you called is there in your foretell, you can add it to your hand and then ascend Wind Djinn to Tornado Djinn from hand or deck. This card is a bad Astrabbit that can then ascend into another creature, so to properly evaluate it, we're going to need to look at Tornado Djinn. Tornado Djinn is a Wind Solar 2-drop with 8/2 stats, so be wary of Eddy, Mudlet, and Cryoblast. You can expend a Wind or Solar Spirit to search for any 3 cards with different names and add 1 at random to your hand, shuffling the rest back into the deck. This reads crazy since it can search anything, but the variance is what's going to get you here. Well, I'll just reveal 3 good cards, you say, but are there really 3 cards in this game that are so good as to render this card worth playing, much less the lower version that makes this guy slightly easier to make? Unless you're extremely lucky or are running other foretell cards, it'll take 2 turns to get to Tornado Djinn, and that second turn is either going to require a Nexus or a re-enchant. If you are playing a foretell deck, you're probably losing anyways, because that deck sucks. I say this as a dedicated Solar player. The deck is terrible. Do not be fooled by these cards. Carrion has gotten a reprint here and an Ascension that makes his ability even stronger, if you draw the 2-card combo. Carrion, when destroyed by battle, allows you to take control of the opponent's monster that killed it during the end phase. This effect would go hard in a game that has a main phase too, but as it stands, it barely does anything. Carry Off, who funnily enough is primarily lunar, even appearing on Dense Fog earning the moniker Dense Rob, is a lunar wind 2-drop with 5/3 stats that can special cast itself when Carrion is destroyed by battle, giving you a little extra something when you use Carrion's effect. Then, if Carry Off survives until your turn, which the stat line makes a little bit difficult, you can expend 2 lunar to steal an opponent's Elestral until the end of the turn. This is much better since it allows you to actually do something with an opponent's Elestral other than use it as a spirit bank. If that's all I can say about it though, as a 2-card combo, I can't in good conscience recommend it. The last wind-specific tool is Aviolith, the final lith. And oh brother, did they save the least for last. Like the other liths, Aviolith is a 2-drop that can be normal cast in certain conditions, but this one is a 4/6, meaning it crashes with Eddy. This takes away the biggest advantage of a lith, being a big asshole that comes out of nowhere. It can only be normal cast when the opponent has 2 set runes, which is likely to happen in the post-Thunderstorm environment, but is also called into question by a new card coming up next. The bonus effect is to draw a card for each face-down rune the opponent controls. That sounds good, right? Draw 2 is pretty good. No complaints there, right? Oh wait, there's nothing stopping the opponent from activating those face downs. And then you don't get the draws. I guess at least it forces out the back row if they even care about you drawing. Sorry, this one is just a lot of nothing. Lastly, for wins, we have another more generally applicable rune with a unique cost. Hurricane is a Wind, Thunder, Water invoke rune that destroys all face-down runes. Does nothing to stadiums and divines, but at least clears out all counter runes. This one is a hard one to place, and a lot of people have been going back and forth on it. It's a major punish for setting up too much back row, which has become pretty popular in the wake of Thunderstorm. Since Thunderstorm can only destroy 1 rune at a time, you want to set more than 1 so you can still have interaction after they use it. But if they have Hurricane instead, you would rather be playing only 1 face down to not get completely wiped out by it. This leads to a back and forth of people playing around Thunderstorm and playing into Hurricane, making Hurricane good enough to play, and then people playing around Hurricane and making Thunderstorm crazy. The thing is though, Thunderstorm is always at least pretty good even in the multiple back row. It's just crazy good if it leaves them wide open. Meanwhile, Hurricane's huge cost and spirit math investment means it's only good if you're getting some sort of 2-for-1 trade at least. Additionally, if you have your own set cards at the time, your opponent has to have even more set to get a fair trade. So if you're playing Hurricane, you also have to be playing around Hurricane and playing into Thunderstorm. There's a strong argument, in my opinion, for just ignoring Hurricane entirely, or at least until we have runes that want to be destroyed. You're probably only going to see this in decks with a lot of room for nonsense in them, and only in ones that are are already on one of these typings, probably Thunder or Water. Maybe just set 2 if you're still afraid of it. But then watch out for Aviolith. Whoa! So did Wind get what they wanted? No. Did they get anything interesting at all? No. Are Wind players going to be happy after the release of Moonrise? Absolutely not. But did they get a few cards here? It certainly seems that way. Sorry, Wind players. Maybe next time. Frost. Okay, on to Frost. Frost has a lot of powerful cards and wouldn't need all that much to go from basically nothing to meta threat. Hell, Rhinosect was already there, flexing a lot of those tools not too long ago. Once again, we have a typing that doesn't need much, but does need something. Let's see if they got it. First, we finally have another 3-part Ascension line. Snowlet is a 1-drop 4/2 that mills 3 when it receives Frost. Finally, more mill! A lot of people were comparing Snowlet to Morlith, but the important thing to remember is that Morlith mills more and has much higher stats. Still, while Snowlet is not as good as Morlith, it can be a decent addition to a Frost mill deck, if not the more generically typed Reanimator decks, which look a lot worse anyways in the wake of Ferrogeist limiting. If you mill Astral, you get to ascend your Snowlet into it, giving you a 2-drop 7/4 nearly for free. Just get lucky. Astral also allows you to mill, sending 4 cards from the top to the underworld by expending 1 Frost Spirit. If you get lucky, this is a good card. If not, it's kind of just a bad Morlith. And you'll need to get lucky one more time as well. Blizzstrix is a 2 Frost, 1 Wind, 3-drop with 12/6 stats. Pretty vulnerable on the defense side, but decent otherwise. When it's sent from the deck to the grave, you can special ascend it to your Astral. It has another effect that allows you to return 3 Elestrals from the grave to the deck to pop a card on field. This allows you to use all those milled Elestrals that didn't do anything or were used for Ascensions. But like, is that it? I have to get lucky on mills to get Astral, who does nothing but mill, and so I have to get lucky on my mills to get Blizzstrix, and then all he does is pop cards, and only if I have 3 Elestrals in the grave to shuffle back. He doesn't even have a way to mill them back into the grave. You gotta get another Astral on field. Additionally, if you mill these fuckers out of order, you're shit out of luck. Sorry you milled Blizzstrix with Snowlet, now you can't get his free Ascend. You have to pay out the ass to summon him back with Rise from the Ashes. Oh, did you draw him instead? Well, now you have to hard ascend him, sorry. Make sure you have Snowlet on the field before you go Morlith too, or else you have the same problem for Astral as you had for Blizzstrix. These guys seem incredibly cope, only fit for the most ardent of gamblers. At first. Then you start thinking about all those powerful tools Frost has and how underworld focused they are. Keon and Frostix can both get you small guys out of the underworld, and Rise from the Ashes can get you the big ones. That's all going to cost a lot of spirits, but Frost also has decent healing tools and the ability to get spirits onto the field from the grave. So now you can basically treat your underworld as a second hand, no matter how bad you mill, so long as you have some fixing tools in the hand. If you can successfully mill most of your deck within a couple of turns, this could be an unstoppable beast. It makes it a little bit less of a gamble now. I'm not exactly sure how good this is going to be in practice, but I do fully expect to see it in action a lot since it's kind of unstoppable once you establish the owls. And there's another card that helps them too, one that we set aside way back when we were talking about the earth types. So Clovey got a reprint this set because of a new Ascension that basically has nothing to do with Clovey, so I'm not even going to talk about that card and I'll skip straight to Cedarsaurus. This is an Earth Frost 2-drop with 4/6 stats, which basically doesn't matter. What does matter is that if this guy is sent from deck to the underworld, you can special cast it with 2 Frost or 2 Earth, meaning it will be misenchanted. That also doesn't matter because the cool part of this card is that it's a free 2-drop that when milled can either be 2 Earth or 2 Frost. This card is really good for any milled deck that intends to play 3-drops like Blizzstrix. Helps them get out of the hand if you draw them instead of milling them to Ascend or Rise from the Ashes. If this card is normally enchanted for some reason, you can also expend an Earth to search a 3-drop Frost or Earth Elestral, further cementing this use case for the card. I just don't think you're going to have this guy normally enchanted very often. The unfortunate thing is though, while we now have a few good things to mill and a few ways to mill, I don't think we have enough of the latter. What we specifically need more of is runes that mill, since adding more Elestrals would just give us more creatures that conflict with our normal cast, unless their mill effects activate upon being milled, which would also be pretty good. I could be wrong on that and the deck could just be good as is, but if we do get those cards that I'm asking for, it'll definitely be good. No doubt about it. Next we have a new Morfrost, Scorpio form. This 1-drop 2/2 is like a whack PTA. When you cast it, you can discard a Morfrost to drop an opponent's Elestral's defense to 0. Then you can expend 2 Frost in the end phase to pop it. Now Morfrost has morphed quite a bit since the early days, shifting away from the abominable form that's actually kind of awful, and towards Terror form, which reduces attack and has a targeting negate instead. The problem is, this build can have trouble getting over guys with large butts. Scorpio represents an answer to that, in addition to another Morfrost name, which is always a welcome sight. Is this enough to bring Morfrost to the top? Probably not yet, but we are getting so close to the critical mass of Morfrost necessary to really get somewhere, which is really exciting. Lastly, we have a new rune, a 1-drop counter rune called Aurora Borealis.
Aurora Borealis!
This allows you to discard a card to enchant one Frost Spirit from the Underworld to your field, and then return one from the Underworld to the Spirit deck. So if you've got one Frost Spirit in the Underworld, this card is essentially free, and can allow you to skip an Ascension step pretty easily, going from 1 to 3 directly. If there were any 3-drops in Frost worth making besides Blizztrix, that would be pretty neat. As is, you're probably just playing in Blizztrix or waiting on this one. I guess it can also matter in Frost Nexus if you have the Stadium rune up, or in More Frost to increase the amount that Terraform decreases attacks by. I don't know, this card is like a neat little tech option for various Frost decks. It's interesting. I think this one is worth testing with to see if the slowness matters or not, or if it does enough to be included in the deck. Although with how long we've had these cards, I imagine a lot of you have already done your playtesting already. I will say though, it's also when the opponent is going to feel silly hitting with Thunderstorm or Hurricane, so that's fun too. So Frost actually got some interesting cards, particularly for the various sub-themed decks like Frost Mill and More Frost. I don't think it was enough to shift their positions too much unless the Blizztrix deck is actually crazy, but they're welcome additions for sure. Compared to some of these other typings, Frost is coming out very well. Solar. Finally, we arrive at Solar, which is such a disappointing typing. Having only been introduced in the last set Daybreak, I suppose it actually makes sense that the deck feels like it's lacking what it takes to be good, but whoo, boy is it lacking. The worst part of the deck is the major focus on the Foretell keyword, which isn't necessarily bad on its face, but does rely a lot on getting lucky, and in a deck this bad, you can get very unlucky. And not only can you get terribly unlucky, you know how unlucky you are as soon as you do the first Foretell. You now know the top 3 or more cards of your deck and exactly how fucked you are for the next 3 turns. This has a psychological impact on the player, something we don't talk about enough, and can really negatively impact your play patterns or wear you out faster in a long tournament. All of this together explains the terrible conversion rate of Solar despite the very large representation in the wake of Daybreak. All of this to say, Solar needs some good fucking cards to get off the ground finally. Let's see if they've got a light at the end of their tunnel. We have another 3-drop here with Array. This 1-drop 4/1 cannot be suppressed. That's pretty neat. So what's this effect that can't be interfered with? Well, when you activate First Light, you can special ascend Cock Array into Drake Array from hand or deck. Now, let me be clear. This chains to the First Light activation, so you do get the Drake Array and then stack the card per the First Light effect, so there's no issue here. So really, to evaluate the power of Cock Array, we'll need to see if Drake Array is worth the 2-card combo, one part of which does absolutely nothing on its own. Drake Array is a Solar Fire 2-drop, combining 2 bad tastes together in a 7/3 package. Yes, this does lose to Eddie. When Drake Array is cast, you get to return 3 Solar Spirits from the Underworld to the Spirit deck. Because Drake Array will activate in a new chain, you do get to return the spirits used to activate First Light. So that's nice. Then, during your draw phase, after you draw the card you put on top of the deck, you can expend the Fire Spirit to special ascend into Dragolus, which is easy enough to do, so we should look at that too before we evaluate. So you slam in the back of your Dragolus, and you get a 2 Solar, 1 Fire, 3-drop with 13/5 stats, even more vulnerable in defense than Blizztrix. It allows you to expend a Fire Spirit, which means you're going to need plenty of those, to suppress each face-up card on the opponent's field until the end of the turn. Then you can enchant Dragolus with Solar Spirits from either the Spirit deck or the Underworld up to the number of cards you suppressed. With a whopping 13 attack, a ton of spirits on board, and the ability to turn off the effects of creatures, this is a pretty impressive beater. The setup isn't the worst either. Cock Array can't be suppressed, so if you draw into the 2-card combo, you almost certainly get your Drake Array, and Drake Array gets a chance to special ascend every time you draw, so they can either out your guy or just delay the inevitable. Now here's the thing. They can just out your guy. Drake Array loses to Eddie. You gotta stop making 2-drops that lose to Eddie. This strategy is also vulnerable to back row. While Dragolus can stop face-up threats, it has no protection or recourse against face-down cards. It's pretty vulnerable against even the likes of Tsunami since it has such a low defense. I don't know, I feel like this set of cards might have potential, but it needs more protection. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be one of those 3-drops that I look at and go, how is this not good? Every so often, try to force it and then go, oh, I remember now. Unfortunate, but hey, maybe someday. Armadon is a 1-drop 1/6, giving it that beautiful Moose Station defense stat that is so rare for 1-drops. When it changes position, your opponent must expend 1 spirit. Remember how I was talking about the potential of a deck entirely based around changing positions earlier? Well, here's another potential piece. While swapping this guy to attack position does make it vulnerable, Tsunami not only swaps it back to that beefy defense stat, it also burns your opponent again. Swapping this guy into attack can also be a way to bait an opponent into a Shield of Achilles. Even just having a set card could intimidate the opponent from attacking until they can find a way to out your back row or Elestral by card effect instead. Tsunami High Tide can also swap it on your turn to get it back to defense position before your opponent can even take a crack at it. This guy is very interesting to me. Probably even sees play in Solar just because of its huge stat and the burn potential for whittling down the opponent. I'm definitely considering it for my my build since I like to include Eddy and Tsunami anyways. Surely it's better than Lumaru, right? It also has a lot of potential as a side deck pick to be run against 5 since it blocks every 1-cost Elestral in the game and is immune to Cryoblast. You might think you can just crack it with Eddy, but that play turns Eddy into a 2-cost Elestral thanks to the burn effect and gets countered by Tsunami, Gorgon's Gaze, or even Shield of Achilles or PTA if that's the only Elestral on the field. The Tsunami counter is particularly brutal since it burns you for even more. 5's main answer to this would have to be running Zeus or Demeter or drawing into Laurels, meaning we might finally see the end of 5's as a strategy. It supposedly ascends into Gardon, a 2-drop 3/8 that loses to Eddy. It gives all your Elestrals plus 2 defense, bringing it to 10 defense. Pretty hefty for a 2-drop. Still loses to Eddy though, unlike the pre-ascension. When your opponent activates an effect targeting 1 or more of your runes, you can expend 2 solar to negate it. This guy fucking sucks. He's quite possibly the worst card in the entire set. An extreme letdown after seeing how interesting Armadon is. I don't even want to talk about him anymore, so moving on. Luxomare is a 1-drop 4/5, which are pretty hefty stats like its cousin Arrowmare. When an opponent takes control of this card, you can special cast an Eostale from the hand or deck. You may be wondering how or why an opponent would take control of it knowing that, but there's a card in this set specifically for that. We're going to take a look at Eostale and then that rune, and then judge these cards because this does literally nothing without them. Eostale is a 2-drop 6/6 that when cast foretells 3. Then you can special cast a 1-spirit light Elestral foretold that way. Solar runs a lot of those to be added by Apollo, so that seems actually pretty decent. It's only on cast though, so you only get to do it the one time. If you miss, it's kind of just a waste, although Eostale has okay stats, especially if you get it out without ascending. The rune that makes that happen is Cunning Offer, a 1-cost solar invoke rune. It gives the opponent one of your Elestrals and then gives it the effect when this Elestral is destroyed in battle, you must expend 3 spirits. This means you can give your opponent your Luxomare, summon your Eostale, then run over the Luxomare you just gave them to deal 1 damage and then 3 more damage from the burn effect. Now you might be thinking that you could also use this card to give your opponent Foamy or something like that to trigger yourself, but unlike in Yu-Gi-Oh, these effects will be triggered by your opponent despite the card going to your underworld. That's why the burn effect gives the opponent the burn damage and not you. I'm sure we'll see other funky control swap cards in the future designed to take advantage of this card and more cards let swap control, but for now this is just another mediocre 2-card combo. The last solar card is another rune, Helios Slumber. This 1-cost counter rune takes an Elestral from the underworld and puts it on top of the deck. This one is ruined by being a counter rune instead of an invoke rune. If it was Invoke Rune, it would be a cool way to recycle your resources in Solar that want to be foretold, but at this point it's basically just soul stocks anyways, so who cares? As a counter rune, it's just a way to make your next draw a guy you lost and want to use again, or a very slow way to stack for a foretell. If it was an Invoke, I could see it being a potential include someday, but as a counter rune, I think it will probably never see play. Not unless some card comes along to specifically break this card, and even then I'm not so sure it'll be enough. So, Solar, huh? It's got some interesting tools for sure, particularly Armadon, but none of them really fix the problem of Solar, and most of them are just introducing new gimmicks to a deck that's already suffering from its own gimmick. I don't see Solar really gaining much from this set besides a new 1-drop that won't take it as far as it needs to go to see success. Very disappointing for me and my fellow Solar enthusiasts. Generics. We are extremely light on generics this set, which is a bit of a shame if I'm being honest. I think the one thing the game really needs right now to shake up some of the staleness of the game is more generics to make it harder for people to decide which back row they're playing. PTA, Shield, and Gorgons are getting so old. Maybe next set. Our first of only 2 generic cards is Divine Healing. This 1-cost Invoke rune allows you to enchant up to 3 spirits from the underworld to a Divine rune on your field. This is kind of a whack-ass Ambrosia for decks that need to play the Divine runes. Ambrosia is so good though that whack-ass Ambrosia might be worth it. Thing is though, you still have to have a Divine on the field to actually do this. You may end up in a situation where you're purposefully not using the last spirit on your Divine in hopes of drawing the Divine Healing. And I think that's a mistake, but also drawing into Divine Healing right after you used up your Divine rune is going to be a soul punch of a horrific level. This might see play, but it seems way less generally useful than its cousin Ambrosia. Our last card for this set is Spoiled Fruit, a 1-cost counter rune. It negates an effect that returns spirits from the underworld to the spirit deck and destroys the card. The most obvious target for this would be Ambrosia, which everyone is on, but I doubt this sees general play just to stop Ambrosia. More likely this will see side deck play against Healstall, which yes, is still around, or other decks that happen to feature healing like Frost Nexus maybe. I like this as a side deck card though, really makes the heal decks can be so frustrating feel a little less so. Whereas negating Quackle with Gorgon's Gaze for 2 spirits felt awful, negating and destroying it for 1 with Spoiled Fruit is a lot better. I'm kind of into it. So there you go, not many generics, but at least they're both interesting. Maybe not good, but interesting. Here's hoping we have a few more next set. Conclusion. So that's Moonrise. I think that this set is the most impactful set released since base set, but that's kind of a low bar. Frostfall and Daybreak have resulted in very few meta-relevant cards. Frost Nexus is super cool, but failed to convert except for the brief time that Rhinosect was relevant, and even that deck eventually dropped a lot of the Frost tools. Solar has not even had that much success. Eddy, Mudlet, Cryoblast, and maybe Spectaris in the side really seem to be the only Daybreak cards to make a significant splash. By comparison, Moonrise offers 3 pretty strong Lunar variants that I think have a shot at making top cut at least, new powerful tools for Earth, Thunder, Frost, and Water, a payoff for Self-Mill finally, the bones of a new position control deck, and some neat generic tools I'm excited to see around. Would I like a little bit more out of these cards? Yeah, for sure. I think the set needs more of those generic tools, and I think Fire, Wind, and Solar could have gotten better cards for sure. I'll be honest though, my expectations for this set weren't exactly high. Much like Frostfall and Daybreak, Moonrise is what's always going to be hampered by the fact that it has to introduce an entire typing in one set. There was an attempt to lessen that effect by sneaking some Lunars into Daybreak, but you can still feel it pretty hard with how few cards some of the typings got. Only 2 generics is outrageous, frankly. It boggles the mind. But I think Moonrise accomplishes this feat better than its compatriots. The Lunar cards feel much stronger than the Frostfall Frost cards and Solars from Daybreak, and there's actually a decent amount of cards that catch my interest in the set outside of the brand new typing. I say all this not to rag on Moonrise, which again looks to be the best set yet, especially considering the continued increase in quality control, but instead to point out that next set is finally free from these shackles. We have all the typings now, which means that the next set can focus on adding powerful cards, new type combinations, and new archetypes. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for Elestrals, and I think Moonrise will give us at least a decent shakeup of the game for the next year, and I'm downright giddy to leave my bad Solar deck behind to try out these new Lunar decks. Now if only they hadn't limited my Camel so I could abuse it to the fullest extent. Oh well, playing it at 1 is probably correct anyways. Let me know what you think of all these cards, and if there's any additional synergies you want to point out. Here's to a new format and to new cards. See you in the next one. Hey there, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Got a lot more for you if you want them. Just hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notifications. I'd also appreciate if you left me a like and a comment, maybe share the video around with your friends. You can also follow me on all usual social media sites. Just check out my website in the description below for more info. My videos are funded by my patrons and YouTube members, whose names you'll see scrolling by in these credits here. For just $1 a month, you too could find yourself here, trapped in my end screen for all eternity. In particular, I'd like to thank Haru Hayes, Fleakill, Frog Prince Michael, Jeremy Coatney, the Almighty Ferret Lord, and Fire Mizuni. A big thanks to all my other patrons and unto my little community as a whole. Remember to be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and have a wonderful whatever time it is for you. Bye-bye!